Good afternoon. What an extraordinary afternoon it is. And it's now my pleasure to thank two individuals who will introduce the colleagues I have the great privilege to speak with on the panel. These two individuals are Elsa Hardy and Liat Rubin, without whom this convening, in my mind, really could not have taken place. Their work for the past year and change has been nothing short of heroic. They are two students here. I'll briefly read their bios. Liat Rubin is a senior here at the college, concentrating in history and literature. She's also a multimedia artist and has performed in numerous on-campus theater productions. Her 2008 photographic series, You Are Mine, was featured in an art space in Los Angeles, and she currently serves as the research assistant and ambassador to the Vision and Justice Project, and she plans to pursue a career in visual art and advocacy. Elsa Hardy is a doctoral student here at Harvard in African and African American studies with a primary field in history. Her research interests include domestic labor, Black family life, and social history of prisons. She is from New York City, and she received her BA and high honors in African American Studies and Hispanic Literature and Cultures from Wesleyan. She's also a Mellon Mays undergraduate fellow. Please join me in welcoming these two extraordinary women.
Good afternoon. It is an honor to have the opportunity to be a part of this incredible convening and in the company of such an inspiring group of speakers. I'm especially excited to be here as I've been working very closely with the Vision and Justice Project this year as the graduate research assistant. During a meeting with the Vision and Justice ambassadors several months ago, Professor Lewis asked a group of us to research a man named Julian Abel. I'm curious, by show of hands, how many of you have heard of Julian Abel? Okay, a few. You have. Julian Abel was the second African American to earn a degree in architecture in 1902. After graduating with his degree from the University of Pennsylvania, Abel joined the firm of Horace Trumbauer, where he worked until his death in 1950. He started as a junior architect before eventually being promoted to chief designer and ultimately to the head of the firm. As Julian Abel rose to prominence in the world of architecture, he changed the landscape of the country that subjugated him. Along with his team, Julian Abel had a hand in designing a number of iconic buildings, including the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Free Library of Philadelphia, 3 buildings on Penn's campus, including the President's House, and a staggering 49 buildings on Duke University's campus. This latter project was especially significant as there is evidence to suggest that he was not allowed to set foot on Duke's campus despite having designed it because of segregation laws. Both Duke and Penn have done a lot of institutional work to recognize and memorialize Abel's contributions to their universities. Duke's main quad, for example, was renamed Abel Quad, and the university archives recently exhibited Abel's many blueprints and sketches that brought the campus to fruition. Importantly, Abel was also involved in the design of Harvard's Widener Memorial Library. That's Julian Abel there. Arguably the university's most iconic building. The history of Widener Library is most often told through its namesake, Harry Elkins Widener, who lost his life on the Titanic in 1909 and whose family subsequently funded the building's construction in his memory. But I ventured into one of Widener's reading rooms this past winter with the hope of excavating the history beyond the Widener family. What role exactly did Julian Abel play in Widener's design, and how can the Harvard community do a better job of memorializing his contribution to our own campus? Though the Harvard University Archives has a large collection on the Widener Library designs, information on Julian Abel's contributions is scant. I found a few anonymous references to him as the draftsman. When his name is mentioned explicitly, it is misspelled. To my surprise and delight, I found one book in the Harvard Library catalog, Julian Abel and the Architecture of Bon Vivant, by James G. Spady, published in 1982. I had waited patiently for it to arrive from its off-site location. How ironic, I thought to myself, that of all the books in this library, the one on its architect lives somewhere else. Book proved to be a generous term. The library attendant handed me a small pamphlet. I sat there in defeat, flipping through the 6 unbound pages, when a familiar name caught my eye. In the acknowledgement section on the final page, James Spady thanked the people who had preserved Abel's memory and legacy. Among them was my great-grandfather, Dr. DeHaven Hinkson, better known as D. Let me back up for a moment. I learned from Henry Louis Gates and Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham's incredible biographical collection, African American Lives, that Abel was born in Philadelphia in 1881 and lived his whole life there. His mother worked as a washerwoman, his father a milliner, and he was the 8th of 11 children. The Abels were part of Philadelphia's middle-class Black community and had access to higher education in a way that many Black families in the early 20th century did not. Julian's oldest brother, Robert, for example, co-founded Mercy Hospital, the only Philadelphia hospital that would accept African American patients, and his sisters held jobs as calligraphers and teachers. My family existed in similar Philadelphia circles, and in many ways, the stories I grew up hearing about their lives led me to pursue a PhD in African American studies. But I never imagined that my quest for information on Abel's time at Harvard would lead me back to them. In his pamphlet, Spady writes that oral history accounts have assured Abel's place in the minds of many OPs, or Old Philadelphians. One such OP is my great-aunt Betty, Dee's only living child. At 95, Betty could not recall many specific memories of Abel when I called. I just knew him as a member of a family who were family friends, she said, but I knew he was an architectural genius, and I knew he was famous. She remembers eavesdropping on a conversation about Abel's marriage to a French woman, Marguerite. When I was little, I had big ears, so I have some facts, she said, but they might need to be verified. Though Dee was younger than Abel and his siblings by at least a decade, they shared similar professional trajectories. Dee worked with Julian's older brother, Robert, at the Black hospital he founded. Betty fondly recalled her godmother, Dorothy Abel. In addition to these professional and familial entanglements, the 2 Black Philadelphia families shared an emphasis on the arts long before the dawn of the Black arts movement in the 1960s and 70s. In the words of Spady, they were pursuers of the marvelous. Abel is best known for his prolific output as an architect, but he was also a painter and made furniture, jewelry, and lithographs. Over in the Hinkson house, Marian Anderson was a frequent visitor and gave piano lessons to Dee's daughters, my great-aunt Betty, and my grandmother Mary, who would grow up to be a dancer. My late grandmother, Mary Hinkson Jackson, whom I called Peachy, was a product of the subsequent generation. Undoubtedly influenced by the community of artists around whom she had been raised, she understood visuality, movement, and justice to be deeply connected. She was among the first 2 Black dancers to integrate the Martha Graham Dance Company in 1953, and she traveled the world performing and teaching. Though her work often carried her thousands of miles from the neighborhoods and courtrooms in which the civil rights movement was being fought, my grandmother made sure I knew that moving her body was both a privilege and a fight of its own kind. She told me stories of holding the only other Black dancer in the company and weeping by a fountain in Italy when they got word of the Brown v. Board of Education ruling in 1954, of a tour with Harry Belafonte and Alvin Ailey when they coated their bodies in Vaseline so their skin would glisten under the lights. Saidiya Hartman considers the aesthetic afterlife of slavery. Quote, "The past, the present, and the future are not discrete and cut off from one another, but rather we live in the simultaneity of that entanglement. This is almost common sense for Black folk. As I sat in Abel's Widener library, unraveling the threads connecting my family to his through time and space, never had I felt this entanglement so acutely. The 6 pages that felt flimsy when they were first delivered to me suddenly seemed rife with information and possibility." Hartman asks, what is the character of the aesthetic in the context of terror? Does death find its antidote in beauty? Perhaps her words illuminate an otherwise shadowy archival trail left in Abel's wake. One generation removed from the Civil War and another two from civil rights, Abel worked quietly in spaces he was not always allowed to enter to create beauty that would endure, building by building, sketch by sketch. In the process of assembling the civic curriculum that you received earlier today, I wrote to the Free Library of Philadelphia, one of the institutions Abel designed, seeking permission to publish an image of Abel from their collection. They directed me to a man named Peter Cook, one of Abel's living descendants. I wrote to him explaining who I was and what I had discovered. He replied, "As a Harvard College grad, class of '85, it's special to know that Julian Abel is being celebrated. As an undergrad, I loved walking by Widener Library en route to my classes, knowing that my great-grand-uncle was its designer. It's particularly poignant to me since I have followed in the family tradition of becoming an architect. I noticed that David Adjaye is on the program. I worked along with David Adjaye in the design and development of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. Please tell David hello for me." So, today, I am honored to introduce someone who needs no introduction, whose works are heralded and who is making a way for Black cultural production that is in lineage with those whose stories are still in the shadows, like Abel. That man is Sir David Adjaye. Adjaye's ingenious use of materials and his sculptural ability have established him as an architect with an artist's sensibility and vision. His firm, Adjaye Associates, has offices in London, New York, and Accra, with projects in the US, the UK, Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. His largest project to date, the Smithsonian Institute National Museum of African American History and Culture, opened on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. in the fall of 2016. Other prominent completed work includes the Idea Stores in London, the Moscow School of Management, the Sugar Hill Mixed-Use Social Housing Scheme in Harlem, and Harvard's Cooper Gallery, where we hope you will join us tomorrow evening for a public reception to celebrate the new Gordon Parks exhibition. Prominent ongoing projects include a new home for the Studio Museum in Harlem and the National Holocaust Memorial and Learning Center in London. In theory and in practice, Adjaye is committed to architecture that provides opportunities for transformation, not just of physical space, but also of our social realities. Sir Adjaye, we are thrilled that you could be here, and we are honored to welcome you to campus. And Peter Cook says hello. Please join me in welcoming Sir David Adjaye.
Thank you, Elsa, and thank you to all of our incredible audience members and participants. My name is Liat Rubin, and like Elsa, I've worked as a research assistant to the Vision and Justice Project and to the incredible Professor Sarah Lewis for nearly a year to this day. It has been a remarkable joy to experience this monumental convening in my final year as an undergraduate at Harvard. The participants I have the great honor of introducing today have transformed the very essence of the way I and many more across the world contemplate our relationship to art and the pursuit of justice. My personal journey with this dense intersection began when I was a child, growing up in a mixed-race family in a predominantly white California town. My mother is Ethiopian and my father is Israeli. While I'm more consistently identified as Black, my siblings pass as white, a circumstance which led me to an early intellectual curiosity with race, Blackness, and belonging. As I grew older, I turned to the arts as a site for discovery. Pursuing theater, singing, and photography, I sought to understand the intersection of art and racial justice, of the way art could be used to understand and reflect on the nuances of identity. When I arrived at Harvard, and enrolled in Vision and Justice, I gained clarity and immense inspiration from the work of Carrie Mae Weems. Weems is a recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, including the MacArthur Fellowship, the W.E.B. Du Bois Medal at Harvard University, and the BET Visual Art Award. Weems and her prolific work entered my life when I needed it most and have inspired me throughout my own artistic pursuit as a photographer and a filmmaker. With each body of work I uncovered, from her 1990 photographic project, the Kitchen Table series, to her masterful appropriations in the 1995 to 1996 work, From Here I Saw What Happened and I Cried, to her 2016 performance and video work, Grace Notes, Reflections for Now. Weems guided me and her many, many devotees through a world of expansive artistic mastery, where an artist's body functions not only as a source of production, but as an inseparable aspect of the artistic process, powered with agency and awareness. Weems intervenes in visual arts history, creating works which contend with the many images historically weaponized against African Americans and numerous other vulnerable communities. In a recent New York Times profile on Weems, the photographer Dawood Bey elaborates on a foundational aspect of their friendship. He says, "We both shared a sense that our very presence in the world as human beings who were also Black demanded that we live lives and make work that somehow made a difference and that left the world transformed in some way and that visualized a piece of that world that was uniquely ours. Today, Weems shares that piece of the world with us." Leading me to Weems and the field of vision and justice, of course, is the next person I have the great honor of introducing, Professor Sarah Elizabeth Lewis. As a best-selling author, curator and guest editor of the landmark Vision and Justice issue of Aperture, Professor Lewis is a public intellectual who has worked tirelessly to deconstruct the boundaries between the academy, the arts, and civic society. In her Harvard class, Vision and Justice, The Art of Citizenship, which is now a general education course, Sarah introduced me to the world of Black art. In doing so, she unearthed a series of questions, methodologies, and possibilities that have since guided me as a thinker, as an artist, and as a person. As a student in Professor Lewis's class, I learned to look at images in a new way. Professor Lewis urged me and countless others to think about visuality and its relationship to citizenship and belonging. I was introduced to Deborah Willis's scholarship on Black photography and its relationship to identity and family. I immersed myself in works on race and justice by artists like Glenn Ligon, Hank Willis Thomas, and LaToya Ruby Frazier. I contemplated the significance of memorialization and remembrance in relation to scholarship by Kirk Savage and Brian Stevenson's National Memorial to Peace and Justice. Students of art and justice, like myself, are indebted to these innovators. It has been a privilege to study and work with some of the most seminal artists and activists of our time. For this reason, I am honored to welcome Sarah Lewis and Carrie Mae Weems to the stage.
So, in thinking about this convening, I realized that we couldn't have a discussion about the topic of art and justice without you, Carrie, and without you, David. And because we don't have all the time that we'd love, I think we said at the start we're going to dive right in and think through the function of how it is that we create space and institutions as a builder, yes, but as an artist who is interrogating them. And I wanted to ask you, Carrie, a question first, and I think it's one that's on David's mind as well. How do you go from, or what's the impetus to, as an artist, initially focusing on photography, arrive at a point where buildings, the Guggenheim, the Louvre, become your raw materials for your work?
Do you have the slides? Actually, you can start them any time.
Oh, yeah. But
Great.
let's see.
Yeah,
They
because
should be
they'd
looped.
actually become a reference, I think, for the audience. You know, this is an interesting thing. I mean, I'm thinking about, first of all, welcome to the coming out party. We're calling this young woman I have known for a very long time, since she started at MoMA. And I have watched her grow and mature and become her own very, 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 very special person in this wonderful way. I thought I saw like something shooting across the sky. And I thought, that's a star. So we are at your coming up party. We salute you. We salute you. We salute you. Bravo. Well done. You know, social justice, of course, is trending at the moment.
Yes.
Which I find wonderful and problematic. Hi, Skip. And, you know, the people that I know, the people that I care about, my community, the community that I've grown up in, we've been working tirelessly towards and around notions of social justice for decades. That's right. For decades. When I got my first camera, it was from my boyfriend, who was awful. He was a terrible person, but he gave me a camera. It was the best thing about him. And I knew immediately, really, I knew immediately that it was something that I wanted to use as a kind of expressive tool to get at some of the things that concerned me, that I thought were so fundamental about who we are beyond blackness,
Yes.
beyond color, but as complicated, difficult, complex bodies of humanness, right? Really trying to understand something about that and about how to express that immediately in photography. As I thought about that, I think also as a young child. I think I was very fortunate to have such a wonderful father who very early on in my life insisted, as a young child, I remember him picking me up saying, never forget that you have a right, that you have a right, and that you're human and that you have a right to be. That was powerful. And it's, I think, a lesson that has permeated, I think, every aspect of my life. I am therefore comfortable in the world, and I'm comfortable in this complex skin.
Yes. Yes.
So I started very early, Sarah, thinking about these ideas.
And the move then into a realm that is David's, right? Thinking about institutions. How did you start to move into that space and thinking about taking over an institution or using it as a backdrop to make a statement?
Well, you know, interestingly enough, David, and as in my, you know, when I was in my early 20s or so, I started paying attention to buildings. And, you know, it's like this sort of new architecture. It's like a new architecture that was sort of emerging, where all buildings, they were all sort of glass, dark glass, and they sort of insisted that it reflected you, right? I mean, it was like a strategy around architecture. I thought, this is really interesting, you know? But I didn't know that I was interested in architecture. I was just paying attention to what these buildings were doing and how it was made to feel in relationship to the architecture, you know? Not unlike, you know, being a student at Berkeley and walking on that campus and feeling like the architecture had a certain kind of power that insisted that I respond to it as a subject, right? You know, and that it let me know whether or not I was actually invited in or out of it by its very structure. I thought that was so fascinating. And the way I was made to feel walking into a building, or walking down, you know, a promenade, walking up a flight of stairs, all of that, you know, walking into that great library down the road that, you know, your great uncle had something to do with, right? I mean, you know, all of that was sort of really interesting to me. So these ideas about sort of, you know, developing, sort of looking at that and then paying attention to notions about institutions and what institutions were, how institutions function, the power of institutions, also became sort of a natural kind of curiosity. I thought, I think I'm going to go stand in front of those things. I think I'll go witness them, stand in front of them, and sort of, not just sort of confront them so much, but use my skin, use my body as a way of marking what they have historically been. What was inside of them, what was outside of them, what needed to change in relationship to them, what needed to be developed inside of them. So these ideas about sort of institution building as well were, I think, very early thoughts. And so I've struggled hard and worked hard to get inside of them, to critique them, to understand my body in relationship to them, but also to understand something about the power of these institutions and what they are and what they exude by their very architecture.
Yes, yes.
And that's where David comes in.
No, absolutely. I mean, Carrie, I remember when I first saw your images, and they affirmed to me the absence that I was always very sad by of the black body in spaces and institutional sort of buildings or in architecture in the urban world that kind of had this sort of dignity and the confidence of belonging. And I mean, my sort of trajectory into wanting to work in the built environment came from that sense of being in London and growing up with my youngest brother who was disabled, and being, you know, an immigrant in the country and being invisible in that context, but also having a disabled brother and having that second invisibility of disability. This is the late 70s and 80s. And it was a kind of horror I couldn't spin out of.
So you came to architecture very early then, as well.
In its emotion, so in a way, this idea of feeling that one had a right to exist. I love what you just said about your father. I've got to do that with my kids. That's the thing to go home and do immediately. Was a kind of very powerful sort of driver, and it was just not willing to believe that one couldn't be part of the construction of this, or the disruption and the kind of changing of this to be a little bit messier. Because actually the narrative of architecture, ironically, it's a very strong but silent story maker that is the stage in which we all perform in.
Right.
And what we don't realize is that that stage actually choreographs how we behave.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so when you came to architecture, your very particular way of marking a building and sort of using a kind of skin and scrim on buildings is sort of also then related to this idea of making place in a very particular kind of way that moved it outside of, even though you're working within a Western tradition, of reflecting something away from its Western madeness. Is that right?
Well, I think that I became very interested in the idea of technologies and culture. And what has been conflated, I mean, I think architecture is one of the last disciplines that hasn't sort of had this kind of post-structuralist moment of kind of crashing the sort of pyramidal narrative of some sense of things being just that way. So the language and the tradition of the classical language, or the sort of Neo-Greek classical language, which has become the sort of Northern European and sort of American sort of language, has not been questioned as a narrative of what it means to be a citizen and what that idea embodies. It has been in its universal sense, but it was kind of born under an idea of a certain kind of nationalism. It was about a civilization and the emergence of that civilization. And it's a very beautiful language, and its roots come from Egypt. So it is a language that comes through and refines and shifts. But in a way, I think what architecture has been very problematic in doing is that it's started to kind of systematize it as a system for everyone. And in sort of migrating across through empires and colonization, through this sort of system, it started to subjugate everybody under the same structure.
Right.
And I think that the cracks of it and the fractures of it, you know, you see in the various mutations that are all over the place. But I think actually underlie a kind of systematic problem of this idea of trying to universalize everybody under a singular architecture born from a specific narrative.
So then, you know, in this sort of work, and I actually photographed the Smithsonian Museum because, of course, I needed to stand in front of it too, and inside of it. And I haven't done that yet. I photographed the outside, but I haven't photographed my body in relationship to it. So that's my sort of next project when I get to DC. But you did make these sort of disruptions then, and that was a part of
The early
your
work
thinking.
was about
so
that.
way of and also in that city of Washington D.C. Right, this added layer of framing. It's like reframing the frame of the building.
Well, can you do for us a bit of a dive in terms of what Carrie's describing? What intervention do you see is there in the topography of the mall, right? Let's go into
So
the design. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think the mall is quintessentially the play. It's almost the perfect set of this idea of this sort of universalizing architecture that becomes the kind of dominant form. And I think that if you look at the history of it, right from the building of the White House to Congress, etc., the monuments, Lincoln's monuments, the early works, right through to the American Museum, which is an abstraction, but it's exactly the same language. Some people don't realize it's basically abstracted, pilastered neoclassical architecture made in a modern form. There is this singular language continually kind of moving along, and it just became very clear to me that if we were going to make this museum, and it's interesting that the earlier sort of ideas of a kind of national museum of African Americans used a sort of Egypto style, when it was being imagined, 200 years ago, it was kind of referring to this sort of thing. I felt that it needed to finally break the picture. The project had to break the picture.
Right.
Yeah.
And it does.
Absolutely.
Very
Absolutely.
well.
But not in any way to kind of destroy something, but to
no.
complicate something.
Yes, yeah.
And to
But
make
those are like, that's the thing that's sort of interesting. It gets back to something that Sarah had been talking about earlier, these sort of ideas about the nature of invention.
Yes. Yeah.
So that how do you, dealing with what we're dealing with, these sort of complicated ideas around race, around colonialism, around empire, all of these sort of very dense, complicated ideas. How do you then, in the moment of making, in the moment of rather the consideration of making, begin to understand what your sites of disruption are, what your critical inquiry is, and then how to manifest that into the work itself, and hopefully beg the question from the audience that this is not only what you see, but it's also more than that, and this is also a critique of the thing that you're seeing and the thing that we've understood from the past. And that, I think, is really exciting, like how that gets done. And it's something that I'm endlessly thinking about. It's something that, again, Sarah and I have often talked about as well, and with you as well, David, that these ideas about a kind of modernism as it relates to Black cultural production has really not been spelled out in any sort of sophisticated way, though the work is there.
Correct.
Right? The work is there, and the work is there in a beautiful, incredible, articulated form.
Yeah.
But nobody has been really sort of writing about it, which is
Exactly.
why I'm so excited about the work that you've been doing.
Well, you're so sweet. This is a conversation that we've been having for a while. The way in which a discussion about race can cauterize a focus on the imaginative work, the original work of an artist, is to the detriment of the entire field, right? So you have this, in the opening to the edited anthology that's about to come out on your work, which is coming out in the spring, you have this question that Huey Copeland posed, right? Huey Copeland, who's here as Du Bois Fellow for the year.
Huey is here? That's
I
nice.
hope he is here. Yes. Huey asked this question. Oh, you found him? Okay. Have we all been sleeping on Carrie Mae Weems, right? in our
Yes.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
Exactly. And the answer is, well, we haven't, but why have we, and why have we, right? Because of the focus on the need to focus on race to the detriment of not considering the formal inventions that are their own interventions, that are their own
Oh,
statements.
yes, absolutely.
right?
It's the
And so-
easy stuff to do.
Exactly.
It's the easy stuff to do, and it's the most expected thing to do. And this is, I mean, it's so sort of complicated because, in part, it's the reason that we're all here.
Exactly.
So that we're here critiquing the thing that we're also critiquing.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But and so it becomes sort of compounded.
Yeah.
But I think I'm not at all. I'm so not interested really in me, but I am deeply interested and deeply engaged with my field. I'm deeply engaged with my field. I care about it. And my only deep interest is in participating in it in a deep and complex way, of engaging the subjects of art and photography in deep and complex ways, of bringing together extraordinary artists and thinkers and writers and historians in order to think about it, and of course, in asking the sort of critical questions that will move us from the deadlock into a dynamic future.
Right.
Right? What are the questions that we are posing that need to be posed in relationship to this cultural production? What are the terms? Who are the writers? Who are the historians? Who are the makers? And how is that being understood? And how do we use these sort of extraordinary institutions and these brilliant young minds and students to really interrogate
Yes.
in a new way, to really broaden and expand this field? There is no doubt in my mind that we are in sort of an extraordinary moment of renaissance, of breaking new ground in new territory. There are things that are going on in this world that are absolutely mind-boggling. From robotics to technology we're just in this amazing period. And yet we're still talking
Yes.
about race.
Yes. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? While the rest of the world is like, hello, Florence. So forging into this sort of extraordinary future. We are still down here in the mud, grappling around this question of race, that's where we have been, that we can be stuck. So how do we move this forward and into the future in a way that I think is really dynamic? And I think that the work that I'm thinking about, the work that I'm hoping that I make, the work that I assume that David is making, I think starts to get at tearing some of this away from the muck and spinning us into a future that is deep and complex and rewarding and dynamic. And that's what I'm engaged in.
I'd love to add to that because it's really beautiful that the Julian Abel, say hi to Peter for me. I haven't spoken to him in a while. But actually, Peter talked very much about his great-granduncle when we were working on the project. But what's beautiful for me was that what Julian was doing was affirming that the language that was supposed to be the language of sort of Northern Europeans was a language that could be mastered by anyone and manipulated. And what he did was, even before he was visible, he'd already demonstrated a complete mastery of a language that he was not supposed to be privileged to understand.
Yes.
So when I turn up and I'm working, I am assuming that I don't even need to demonstrate that. It's already done.
Yes.
If you don't know it, that's your ignorance.
Yes. Right.
I need to move past what that pedestal has given me, which is to bring my imagination into the world.
Yes.
And that's, I think, the beauty of the moment. So we are talking about race, but I also think that it's kind of impossible not to talk about race. Because in a way, it is the kind of, we are talking about race not in its diminutive or sort of infantilized sense, but we're talking about race in its expansive possibility of complexity in the world.
Yes, this is true.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been talking a lot recently about Louis Armstrong, because I absolutely love him. I love this man, and you know, and I've been thinking about sort of notions of speaking a lot about the last few months around notions of influence, and how influence operates. And you sort of talked about this idea about language, and I thought about sort of hip hop and what hip hop is. You know, this idea that people bereft of language, right, would go on to develop and create and master a kind of language, and to use it under sort of extraordinary pressure, that it would generate something that was so magnificent that it would change the way in which language is spoken around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of an extraordinary idea, right? And the same thing is true with Armstrong. I mean, this man, from Louisiana, who creates this sort of extraordinary sound. There's absolutely nothing like Louis Armstrong playing like the trumpet or clarinet, right? Working under extraordinary pressure, who produces this thing that is unmatched in the world. Or somebody like Aretha, right, our queen who died, who received her PhD, her honorary degree from Harvard several years ago, who again, simply soars, right, above all other voices in her giving back to a community and a group and a society and a culture, a country that ultimately attempted to deny her that right. And so what you do then out of that denial is to create sort of extraordinary interventions and innovations that have relevance for not only you, but the entire world. And you bring sort of new utterance that simply would not have existed without it.
So what I so love about you bringing up Armstrong is it goes back to a point that David made that you're making as well, which is that the demonstration of mastery over a particular form can be an act of resistance.
Yeah.
And can be a mode of justice making. So, for example, and I don't know if you heard earlier, but I was speaking about this event, this convening, as one that is in lineage with the work that has gone on before. Now, that includes the extraordinary convenings that you've put on, and this also includes the work that Deborah Willis has done with Black portraitures. This includes the work that's happened at the Cooper Gallery and beyond Hutchins Center. For your convening at the Guggenheim, what I so loved is that you asked me to read a passage about Louis Armstrong that I wrote for The Rise. And that was this moment in which I learned of this fact from Wynton Marsalis, that Louis Armstrong had catalyzed a narrative of justice by simply being the genius figure that he was. And what I mean by that is this. In 1931, there was a young boy going to hear Louis Armstrong in Austin, Texas. And he was in a period of deep segregation, of course, at the time, but was so struck by the genius of Armstrong that he knew in that moment that segregation must be wrong. He just knew it. And even though his friend to his left, he remembers, uttered a racial epithet about African Americans used during the day, this young man, Charles Black Jr., was sure. Now, Charles Black Jr. said in that moment that his life shifted. He started walking towards justice. He would go on to become one of the lawyers that would argue in the Supreme Court case, Brown versus Board of Education, that outlawed segregation.
Lovely.
And then he taught at Yale and Columbia. For those who don't know, I know Carrie knows. He taught every year with this Armstrong Listening Night. To honor the man who created this life-changing shift. So Armstrong is doing the very work that David describes, that as he walks in, he's aware that he's performing as well. It's a statement through mastery, right, of resistance and justice. Correct. And this is what your work performs as well for us. So, yeah. The reason for focusing on originality and invention as the title for this panel is deliberately to be able to salute the work that we don't often get to discuss because we focus on race. However, I just want to go back to a point that Jelani Cobb made on his panel, that citizenship is a racial narrative, right? And this, I believe, is in part why the entanglement that Saidiya Hartman is describing, that Elsa Hardy was referencing, this kind of entanglement in the conceptual sense. I think it's important for us to put back on the table. Is it possible to move away from race as part of a cultural narrative here? But to get back to originality and invention, there's a question I want to ask David, which maybe will connect also to Carrie's work, and that is, David, and I've never asked you this, what is the function of working with artistic practice beyond the field of architecture that so inspires you? Is there an act of representational justice in your decision to engage with, say, a Chrysophilia in terms of how their work is presented on the world stage, or because you often engage with artists in terms of how their work is presented, and it's rare and it's beautiful.
It seems incredibly obvious to me, but I just have always been in awe of the visual arts' ability to simply take the language and shift it. And it sort of has always played in a kind of almost like in a Trojan horse sort of manner, in the sense that it sort of somehow just shifted the language, took the narratives, and then presented a new form.
Yeah.
And somehow, because of some ability of art to be able to sort of spellblind us, have they been able to move the language and create an aesthetics very quickly. So I was just very jealous. No, I'm being silly, but in a way, I was in awe of that aura. So I wanted to, in a way, activate my own practice by saying that I'm interested in architecture being part of that aura within the lens of the Black experience.
Was there
So the artists are particular. They're all very particular artists.
Yes.
So then this redesign, for instance, for the Studio Museum,
Studio Museum is a wonderful moment.
right? Right? I mean, that it will hold,
Yeah.
that it holds that.
Yeah. It's the Odyssey finishing,
Right.
right? The Studio Museum
It's
is
really,
the Odyssey.
really lovely. It's really lovely. Very, very excited. It opens
Yeah.
when?
In 3 years' time.
Yeah.
Yeah, blink of an eye in architecture.
Well, we are also here because of the performance that Carrie will offer us. I know we have a few more minutes for questions. We haven't opened up for questions from the audience, but there might be a time to allow for that. So I'm saying this very slowly so that you can kind of formulate your question and prepare to come to the center if you have one, because we will have Carrie perform in a bit. Okay.
Hello, thank you. Kenyon Adams from the Louis Armstrong House Museum and Archive.
Love it.
So our whole team is here.
This whole Louis Armstrong Museum team.
I love it.
So I have a question about this relationship between mastery and resistance. And we have, I think we have the benefit of a lot of really robust reflection since, the death of a figure like Armstrong, who died before there were, post-colonial critique was something that a ninth grader would just render to me casually in a conversation. So much work and thinking has really been done since then to reflect upon his influence. My question is the degree to which mastery is held by a community, and how, when we look at a figure like Armstrong, how is it that we can understand, David, when you talk about this presumption or the assumption that something has been proven, therefore I step into my imaginative construction with a freedom and a givenness. You see this in Armstrong, but how is it that we can, from this distance, looking back on over a century of a legacy that's so prolific and expansive, how can we perceive and then draw out and then move forward towards a futurism around the fact of the bodies and lives represented holding the mastery that makes it even possible, such that a figure like an Armstrong or a Carrie Mae Weems becomes something that is expressed profusely in communities, understood in communities, that gives values and reflects back to those communities into, again, a futurism is what we're concerned about at our archives, the futurism of this legacy.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's beautiful. I can jump in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have a hunch that the question, there's a wonderful sort of dialectic in this thing of mastery, because mastery renders something almost seemingly like it's normal. So I think when somebody masters something, they bring it into a kind of normality, and it sort of becomes the way in which we all assume a basis of intelligence and move forward.
Yeah.
I think the criticality of our civilization and the experience of being a human being is that we continually need to master. And there is a requirement in using that as an intelligence and using that as a way to build upon the kind of foundation of the masters. So I know that you're sort of wanting to see if we can kind of if I understand your question, you're trying to see if we can go back and see the kind of magnitude of the mastery that Armstrong, for instance, erupted. Is that somehow, am I sensing what your question is sort of at the base of? It seems like you seem to kind of want people to be able to see that and to use that as a basis to understand their history and their...
Equally concerned
Yeah.
that it's possible to take up Armstrong
Yeah.
as a subject of mastery
But he is.
without at the same time holding the community that must have been a part of shaping that mastery in a way of perceiving its animation as we move forward with constructions of mastery relationship.
It is a seminal
Yeah,
question.
we're saying it's a question for a seminar. Well,
But context is everything.
yeah.
Context is everything.
Yeah.
Right.
We really did
And
design
legacy
today to
and
be a
possibility.
seminar. Yeah.
You know, and it seems that, I think that, this idea about futurisms is something that we're all tasting, right? That we know that we are on the cusp of something
Yes.
new,
Yes.
and we can feel it. There's all of this that's bubbling up. We're talking ultimately about ideas, layers of ideas, and legacy is one of those things. My sense, I've only heard a few great musicians in my life. I've heard a lot of music, but I've only heard a little bit of great music in my life. I've seen a lot of painting, but I've only seen a few really great paintings in my life. Do you know what I mean? And a part of that has to do, I think, with that thing that is absolutely elusive, that we can't necessarily talk about. We can hear, we can feel, we can almost sort of kind of touch, right? But a part of it, I think, is our responsibility to self and community and history and legacy is to pull that forward, is to move it forward as we move forward, right? Is you simply keep doing the work and allowing the work to do the work that the work has to do, right? And part of your responsibility, my sense of my responsibility, is going back again to what I talked about earlier, is participating as deeply and as fully and as complexly as I possibly can within my field, bringing it forward and expanding it and allowing for all the creativity and all the genius that is there, however that is articulated, to be pushed forward to the fullest extent as possible.
Yeah.
That's the work. That's the work, and that's the work for the future, and that's the work of our generation. So I'm 66 years old. And a part of me is to make it possible for you to do your work, and for Sarah to do her work, and for David to do his work.
Exactly.
And Skip made it possible for me to do my work.
Yeah.
And Anna DeVere Smith made it possible for me to do my work.
Exactly.
And Deb Willis made it possible for me to do my work, and for Hank to do his work, right? That is a part of what we do as artists and thinkers and creative beings, is to give ourselves of ourselves, to use this bridge called our back so that we can march forward and do the work that we need to do in the strongest possible, clearest possible way.
All right, so we have two, and one is a student of mine. So we have two last questions, and I'd ask that you frame them as questions, and we'll ask for both to be stated together, because we don't want to. And so ask that they both be stated together, and then we'll answer them together. Okay.
Thank you, and thank you for a wonderful convening. A lot of attention, you were speaking very much about production and the shifting through production, but then there's also the question of reception, right? And I guess I wonder whether your work at all, or whether you consult at all information about, I mean, frankly, and shifting the conversation slightly from art to science, or about the possibility and the wisdom of some of science, neuroscience, what we know about actually what kinds of information does cause one image to actually resonate and succeed in changing minds in a way another doesn't, or I don't know whether any of that information guides your own practice. I'd just be, and if so, who informs you that way? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. You've both talked a lot about inclusion and exclusion in space, and I'm kind of wondering if you can elaborate on like architecture and space in general and how that can offer a form of social justice.
It'd be interesting to reflect on Julian Abel.
Yeah, no, I think starting with the last question, I think that it's a very subliminal thing, because it really isn't a sort of, it doesn't work in that sort of protest sense, but it's, I think, this idea that if you feel included in making the apparatus of the stage, you're happy to perform. That's probably the best way I can say it.
Beautifully put.
And if you don't, I don't think if you, and so that idea of knowing that you are part of that construction is what's critical about inclusion in architecture, in space, in cities that we're in.
Yes.
So that's probably the best thing I could say.
On that note, I would like to offer this as a way to introduce the extraordinary performance. I'm looking forward to having more, I know she's having more time to speak with David Adjaye tomorrow in our morning session in Sanders with the Astor Gates. Yes. We're just so excited, we're going to clap. And
Brother T.
more time tomorrow. But the next performance came about also because of reflecting on what it means to not feel included in a particular space because of architecture. Are we being asked to leave? No, I don't think so. The moment I was standing in the Richmond-based, at the time, American Museum for the Confederacy, now renamed museum, was a time in which I received a phone call. And I was facing Jefferson Davis's mansion, the White House for the Confederacy, and I received a phone call that I'll never forget. And it was really kind of prompted or created by Adam Weinberg, the director of the Whitney. He'd recommended that the director of the Spoleto Festival contact me to think through how best for an artist to commemorate the lives lost in the shooting in the Emmanuel Baptist Church by Dylan Roof, the Emmanuel 9. What kind of work could possibly be done as a moment of grace for these lives lost? And it's not a call I wanted to receive. At the time, I just started working here at Harvard, and I believe it was my first week, and I was in the archives to produce scholarship. And I took the phone call and I said, well, and I looked across to my left to the Jefferson Davis mansion and thought, right, this is part of the work. And on the other end of the line was this request for me to think for some time about what artist I could possibly consider for this project. And I said, I don't need any time at all. The artist that you should choose is Carrie Mae Weems. And this project began this now multi-venued performance, Grace Notes, which became past tense, and is a way to consider and how art can function as, and I will not call it social justice, I never do, representational justice for our field, for our community, and for our world. This convening is deliberately bifurcated, Thursday and Friday, and is meant to conclude with Carrie's performance, in part because I think we'll have time, because of the evening, to reflect on it. It's extraordinarily powerful, and you can tell she doesn't want me to be genuflecting to her and speaking about how extraordinary she is. But this piece just brought me to my knees when I saw it for the first time. And for me, it's an unspeakable privilege to be able to have you perform a modular component of it for us today. So Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Carrie.
We'll be back in a few minutes, or 15 minutes or something.
15 minutes, okay. All right. It's 10 minutes. Okay.
So when I started to, Sarah mentioned how this project came about, and it was such an awful time, a terrible time. All of these killings and shootings, and I was just every day there was another report of somebody being shot, some young black boy, some elderly black man, some teenage girl, and then finally the Emanuel Nine, who invited a stranger, but a young man and a human into their space, who decided that he would simply snatch their lives. These sort of extraordinary times that we have been living through and in. And so when Sarah invited me to work with her and to consider doing this piece, I immediately considered the idea of grace and grace notes, because I thought that it had been so extraordinary that through all of the trauma, through all of the ups and downs, through all of the maligning, through all of the murder, through all of the horrific things that have happened to black bodies, over the last few years and over the centuries, that we would somehow maintain some aspect of grace, that we would still offer humanity and an understanding of somebody else's humanity to them, offer that as a gift, I thought was simply an extraordinary testament to how we have endured. And then I called my mother and I asked my mother the meaning of grace. It was just a fabulous conversation, like what it is, right? What is grace? I called Theaster Gates, called a whole bunch of people, asking them what grace was. And then I came up with this title, Grace Notes. And I was struggling with it because I had not yet come to terms with the meaning of grace. And I still am asking myself that question, what it is, and I will put it also to you. What is grace? It's like one of those a word like love. I love you. What does that mean? And my mother said that she said, oh, Carrie, grace? Well, I think it has to do with love, and I think that it has to do with compassion. Of always offering compassion to the other, and understanding to the other, even when the other would rather see you dead. So, for the honor, we present you with ideas about this project that I have developed. I don't call it a performance because I'm not a performer. I don't call it extraordinary because I have no idea that it could possibly be, but it's certainly very interesting, and it's food for thought, food for your consideration. Vijay Iyer. We'll start. Lights. I have the great fortune to work with Vijay this morning. We didn't know that we were going to be performing together until yesterday. Isn't that fabulous? Necessity being the mother of invention. So this day by day, the country was slowly, persistently changing. Traditions are dying, forces colliding, and demographics shifting. The evidence, along with the anger, was everywhere. The resistance was so strong that you could taste it. But tripped up by forces beyond their control, white men were disaffected and disenfranchised. Black men were disaffected and dying. But both, in the eyes of the state, are devoid of power. And yet blinded by rage, race, and historical circumstance, each blame the other. And I keep coming back to that idea over and over, that each blames the other. I do know that this unrelenting history of violence has certainly taken its toll on me. I don't know about you. And I say to my friends over and over and over, I would rather be doing anything other than talking about this. I always say that I'd rather be shoe shopping. But everywhere you look, from the mass killings of the innocent at school, playgrounds, nightclubs, concert halls, synagogues, churches, mosques, to the escalating violence that has been directed against specifically young black men, young black bodies, which I find extraordinary. One of the things that I really had to look at, because I realized that with the coming of Trump, I hadn't really heard very much about the killing of young black men. And then I went back to do some research just recently, only to discover that indeed when Barack Obama took office, there was an escalation of the shooting of young black men, primarily in this country and across this country. It reached its climax in 2015 and it began to dwindle in 2016 until he left office. This is not an accident. This says something about the psyche, I think, of the country. The Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post has also done some very significant work around this. And so I thought maybe I was hallucinating, but it's a truth, it's a fact. So I've said that this for me is not a play, this is really not a performance. I think of this more really as a set of meditations, a set of considerations to think about, to offer. But you know, I pay a lot of attention to other artists, and it was in reading about another artist. I've been doing all this work on influence lately, and I was reading about another artist that it occurred to me, because I was reading about another playwright, that indeed I was sort of scratching at in some way, the story of Antigone. It surprised me. in doing this work, right? The story of Antigone. And the story of Antigone is pretty simple, really. Challenging his brother in the laws of the state that refuses to recognize his will to power, Polynices, the brother of Antigone, is killed in battle. Rightly or wrongly, it's decreed by the ruler of the land, Creon, that the Polynices who has broken the law should not and must not be buried, but that his body must be left exposed, open to the elements. Antigone, of course, refuses to do this, and she decides that she must honor a life, that she must honor her brother, and that she must defy the rules and the order of the state, and she must bury her brother with some sense of dignity. And for breaking that law, Antigone, too, is doomed. She's sent to her tomb to be buried alive. It seemed to me that, that this story of Antigone had the ability to sort of reach across time and space, a story that was written thousands of years ago, to sort of underscore our moment, as sort of extraordinary and amazing thing. And I think a great testament to the power of art, what art is, how it functions, the art of storytelling, where we are. Antigone, of course, dies. But I want to live. And I realized that all I really wanted to do when I started working on this project was to, in some way, bury my young brothers with some sense of dignity, some sense of honor, whether they committed an offense rightly or wrongly. And so today, in this place, this hour, this house, on these hallowed grounds of Harvard, standing before you, I'm asking you to consider the need to bury these young people, primarily young men, some young women, with some sense of honor and some sense of dignity, and to recognize the right to do so. And two, earlier we had the wonderful opportunity of working with Amani Azuri, Alicia Moran, and Issa Davis, who sang this piece. It's called Remember Me. Imagine that you're out for a stroll by yourself or with a friend, or your child, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your husband, your wife, sister, brother. And from the corner of your eye, you see a police car speeding by, red strobes flashing. For reasons unknown, imagine that the speeding car comes to a full stop right in front of you, and for reasons unknown, the officer gets out for no apparent reason, demands to see your ID. You've heard the story, you've heard the news, and because recent circumstances have taught you a thing or two about the limits of these fatal encounters, your fingers are crossed. Fearing the possibility of becoming yet another statistic, you comply. But as you reach into your jacket pocket for the requested ID, the nervous police officer, for reasons unknown, imagine that you are reaching not for your ID, but for an imagined gun that is imagined to be in your jacket pocket, and for no apparent reason, a shot is fired, and boom, you go down. Imagine that you are on the way home, strolling, kicking it with your friend, chatting on your cell phone, making your way home, passing the time. For reasons unknown, you are stopped by the neighborhood vigilante, a self-appointed guardian of justice, who imagines that you simply look out of place, and therefore questions your presence, your very existence. For reasons contested, and for reasons contested and unknown, a struggle ensues. A fatal shot is fired, and life is over. You go down. For reasons unknown, imagine living under this constant state of pressure, this constant fear, this constant and relentless violence, where time and time again your encounter with those who are meant to serve ends with death, your death, a friend's death, a child's death. Imagine that you are always stopped, always charged, always convicted. Imagine that your child, son, daughter, niece, nephew, my child, is living under a constant state of fear. Imagine that for reasons unknown, they are always stopped, always questioned. Imagine this. Imagine it and see it in your mind's eye. Imagine the impossible. Imagine the worst of the worst and know that it's happening time and time and time and time again. Imagine Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, only boys. Imagine Sandra Bland. And then imagine the grief of their mothers, the suffering of their fathers, and the vengeful hearts of their sisters. And also imagine that for very few of these crimes, nobody has been convicted. In the last few years, absolutely no one has been convicted for these crimes. Now, Antigone tells the people that the bright light of history is now shining down on them, on her and on us. Exposed now, all things are knowable. The age of innocence is past, and we are responsible for our own future. In shame, of course, some will turn away, but the crime still remains. Beautiful. Thank you. 3. Day by day, the country was slowly, persistently changing. Traditions were dying, forces colliding, and demographics shifting from white to black and varying shades of brown. The evidence, along with the anger, was everywhere. The resistance was so strong you could taste it. Tongues were wagging and fingers were pointing to here, there, and everywhere, blaming you, blaming them, blaming us. And yet, tripped up by forces beyond their control. White men were disaffected and disenfranchised. Black men were disaffected and dying. But both, of course, in the eyes of the state, are devoid of power. And yet, blinded by rage, race, and historical circumstance, each blamed the other. There were now wars and rumors of wars. ISIS was growing, China evolving, and the West was trembling in the face of its own created monster. And all trust was broken. We were now in the autumn of the patriarch. Corruption is rampant, crime is everywhere, with bubbles bursting, banks failing, companies closing, capital collapsing, murder, mystery, mayhem, riots, revolts, and revolutions, and assassins and psychopaths everywhere, taking matters into their own hands, ruling the streets and governments alike, goose-stepping right into the White House, knowing that by the year 2020, manifest destiny would be a thing of the past, boxed up and put away. And yet, compelled by the growing sense of loss, Confederates and conservatives were coming out of the attic, despising Obama and voting for Trump. Ki Han Kim. Run. Run, composed by Vijay Iyer, played by Mr. Kim. And jokes. Video 5. So, a black man, a white man, and a Jew walk into a bar. And the white man said, and the white man said, and the white man said, a black woman gazing into the mirror says, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? And the mirror says, Snow White, you black bitch. Don't you forget it. What's 14 inches long and white? Nothing. Why do black people hate taking aspirin? Because they can't stand the idea of picking more cotton. What's the difference between a black fairy tale and a white fairy tale? The white fairy tale begins with once upon a time, and the black fairy tale begins with you motherfuckers ain't gonna believe this shit. You motherfuckers ain't gonna believe this shit. What are the 3 things you can't give a black person? A black eye, a fat lip, and a jaw. Oh, and what did Abe Lincoln say after a drinking bout? I freed the what? What do you call a black person with a PhD? A nigga. Something like having your friends, colleagues with you. So they're sharing just bits and pieces of the material, bits and pieces of the work, not all of the work with you.
The man was rejected, the woman was denied. Time and time again, they were always stopped, always charged, always convicted. The numbers tell the story. She was 25, he was 22, she was 31, he was 25, she was 34, he was 37, he was 27, he was 12, he was 18, she was 9, she was 41, he was 39, he was 12, he was 37, he was 24,
a brother, a husband, a father, a boy, a cousin, a child, a mother, a sister, a
mother,
wife,
a sister, a daughter, a wife, a mother, a child.
She was 24.
He was a father,
He
a
was
brother,
36.
an uncle,
He was
a
23.
cousin, a son,
He was 12.
a child.
He was 6.
He was 37.
A father.
He was 21.
A boy.
He was 31.
A
He was
cousin.
18.
A
He
friend.
was 12. He was 14.
A cousin.
He was 17.
A boy.
He was 18.
Cousin. Friend. Husband. Father.
She was 21. She was 22. She was 37.
Mother. Wife.
She was
sister.
18.
Cousin. Friend.
He was a father, a husband, a brother, an uncle, a cousin, a son, a child, a friend, a wife, a mother, a sister, a friend, a child.
He was trying to get out his ID and his wallet out his pocket, and the officer just shot him in his arm. We're waiting for a back. I will, sir. No worries. I will. He just shot his arm off.
Told him not to reach for it. I told him to get his hand out.
You told him to get his ID, sir, and his driver's license. Oh my God, please don't tell me he's dead. Please don't tell me my boyfriend just went like that.
Keep your hands where they are, please.
Yes, I will, sir. I'll keep my hands where they are. Please don't tell me this, Lord. Please, Jesus, don't tell me that he's gone. Please don't tell me that he's gone. Please, officer, don't tell me that you just did this to him.
The woman was rejected. The man was denied. A man was killed. The body lay in the open, uncovered and exposed. Women wailed and men moaned. For reasons unknown, I saw him running. I saw him stop. I saw
They were
him
no
turn
strangers
with raised
to
hands.
sorrow. Time and time again, the man was rejected, the woman was denied. A man was killed. The body lay in the open, uncovered and exposed. Women wailed and men moaned. For reasons unknown, I saw him running. I saw him stop. I saw him turn with raised hands. I heard a shot. I saw him fall. For reasons unknown, I rejected my own knowledge, and I deceived myself by refusing to believe that this was possible. Commemorating all of the fallen and all those who have endured. Commemorating every Black man who lives to see age 21. Commemorating Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner. Commemorating Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, Sandra Bland. Commemorating Christian Taylor, Samuel Du Bois, Walter Scott. Commemorating Tony Robinson, Philip White, Jerome Reed. Commemorating Tanisha Anderson, John Crawford, Dante Parker. Commemorating Damon Howard, Thomas Allen, and Ezra Ford. Commemorating Jeremy Lett, Lavelle Hall, Bobby Gross. Commemorating Brandon Glenn, Frank Shepard, William Chapman. Commemorating David Felix, Spencer McCain, Darius Stewart. Commemorating Alton Sterling, Orlando Castile, and all of the Emmanuel Nine who gave their lives. Commemorating each and every one of them. Commemorating you, commemorating us, commemorating all those who have the ability to endure. Commemorating every Black man who lives to see age 21.
And so this violence was not like it was in the movies. There were no fast cuts, no zooms, no close-ups, no fades. Reality happens in slow motion and in somber colors. Now a piece by Alicia Moran from a previous performance. That's video number 7, please. My Man Is Gone, Alicia Hall Moran. Music by Craig Harris with Craig Harris and his band. My sister can sing. We continue with life's excerpts, and then we will wrap up with a final piece. So I've been asking myself over and over this question that I don't quite have the answer to. How do you measure a life? Keeps coming back to me. I just lost a great friend, and I think about it in relationship to all of the extraordinary things that he left behind. Okwuyen Wurzer, the great art historian, curator, friend, brother, who's left us just recently. How do you measure a life in this mystery of all mysteries? Down a bit, Patrick. In this Alpha and in the Omega, on a day coming in a world without end. Life amazes me, so vast, so complicated. The infinite. How do you measure life? By what means and by what measure? Do you measure it inch by inch, foot by foot, yard by yard, or step by step? By the moments lost or by the moments gained? Day by day, year by year? By yesterday, today, tomorrow? By the miles walked or by the valleys explored? How? Do we measure a life by the dreams imagined or by the hopes dashed? By the wisdom of wise words spoken or by the sorrow that has been suffered in silence? By the wealth accumulated or by the amount spent? By success or by failure? By the monuments built or by the walls scaled? By defeats or victories, large or small? How will you measure your life? By the forgotten or over the remembered? By all the near misses, the exhaustion? Or by your simple ability to endure? How? Do we measure it by race or by class, by beauty, privilege? Do we measure it by our lover's love or by our hater's hate? Or can we measure it by pushing against the wind, against the tide, against family, against tradition? Or by the suffering of our friends and enemies alike? Or do we measure it by the beginning or by the end? How we stitch it all together on the journey. By the way we confront life or by the way we confront death, by the number of friends that are gathered during a lifetime, or by the remaining few who stand with you at the end, shedding copious tears when they lay your body down. How do you measure a life? Do we measure it by the journey taken, by the road traveled, or by the effort, the will, the drive, the sheer determination to endure it all, to endure all of the unimaginable? Or do we measure it by the kindness displayed? Do we measure it by the grace that has been given, extended to us over the course and the process of living this life? I don't know. But it is deeply my question to understand it within this context that we are trying to understand what it means to be a brown, so targeted, so maligned, historically so mistreated because of this thing called skin. And yet somehow we endure. I ask the question, how do we measure a life? How will you measure yours when it's time? Thank you, Patrick. We want to end again with our dear friends. So happy that I have them in my life, to have this extraordinary music. I don't know what I'll do, and I don't know how I'll make it. But I lay in bed and I ponder, I think about these questions of what I need to do while I'm here. A little bit of what I have to do while I can. First and foremost of all of it is to live. Just to live. Full and whole. And to consider the nature of what is and what will be. Consider the ebb and flow of tides. The beauty and the bliss of water lapping at the shore. I consider the wonders of the world. I consider standing for something, lest I fall for anything while I can. And while we can, perhaps we should consider the slope and the beauty of a woman's body and the joy that it brings without force. Consider the long days and the restless nights, the vast yearning of the lonely and the lost. Consider the deep despair of fathers and mothers who lose their children much too soon. While we can, perhaps we'll consider fixing what is broken, damaged, and lost within ourselves and all around us. Perhaps we'll consider a mood indigo, a love supreme, anchoring us in some way to the rhythm of life and all of its glory, and perhaps to a peace that is yet unknown. Consider the depths of valleys and the height of mountains, and protecting them before they're all washed away. Our new tragedy mounting, building, pushing us to consider new possibilities, new ways of living on this earth. Consider saving yourself, your brothers, and your sisters in some small portion of this planet. And consider the fascinating wonders of the world, its extraordinary challenges. And consider the evidence of things unseen, the wonders of grace, its meaning and its purpose. Consider this while we can. I want to thank you all for standing with us, for being with us for a bit this afternoon. I am grateful to VJ, to the wonderful, wonderful Kim, who I'm meeting for the first time, my wonderful assistant Yao Su in the back, who's helped me pull together all this work in such a short period of time, in about an hour and a half this morning. My terrific friend Tanya Sivaratnam, who helped produce this day, and to the brilliant Sarah Lewis, our new shining star. We welcome her into the bosom of something extraordinary and magical, which is a life of reflection and of great, great, great challenge. For the evening, thank you. City of Sound, DDI. Can we come out to the center of the stage? Bravo. Peace. Thank you very much. Good night. We'll see you tomorrow.
Before we all depart here, there's one last episode. My name is Lawrence Bobo. I'm the Dean of Social Sciences here in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. And it's my pleasure and truly extraordinary challenge, as I'm sure you can appreciate, to close out today's proceedings and to look toward tomorrow. Let me continue a thread that is well-deserved and the great motif of the evening in a way, or one of them. Congratulations to Sarah Lewis on this remarkable session, this creative convening that has made us all focus on the true meaning of vision and justice. It has been at times provocative, at times uplifting. It has been at times informative, and at other times exciting. And it is truly an occasion for deep reflection, and I think that has touched us all. Before the evening concludes, I think it is worth repeating the three organizing questions of this creative convening. Pulled together so brilliantly by Sarah, those core questions were: how is the foundational right of representation in a democracy, the right to be recognized justly, tied to the work of images in the public realm? Secondly, what is the role of art for justice? And thirdly, how have narratives created by culture, the arts, performances, and images, both limited and liberated, our definition of national belonging in the digital age? Now, as I thought about how to pull together some remarks here today and living through this magnificent experience, just a cascade of thoughts were rushing over me, so you'll pardon me if I end up extemporizing a bit here and offering my own snippets, as it were. I am by training a sociologist. Sociologists think of themselves as having a certain distinctive purchase on notions of culture and how culture works and functions. As we know, that's often a very static and alienating view of the role of culture, especially if one were to read work in the 40s and 50s and early 60s. But today, I think we tend to regard culture as more of a toolkit of ideas, beliefs, attitudes, and implicit assumptions that guide how each and every one of us move through everyday life. And then in thinking about culture in that way, I think it's easy to recognize just how critically important the visual is in this. How images, drawings, art, photographs, and the like are the creation, elaboration, and instantiation of culture itself. as I looked at all that we experienced this afternoon and listened and tried to take it in, it occurred to me that images, photographs, they often capture a moment, reveal or evoke an emotion, express an idea or claim, and sometimes bring to mind very elaborate sets of beliefs or scripts. A really complex narrative is brought to the fore. And at that, I am really mindful of some of the notes that Jelani Cobb stressed in his remarks. That is about the importance of culture to who it is that is recognized as a full citizen and who is not. And it struck me in dwelling on that reflection that it dawned on me that Sarah's decision to connect culture to visual art and photography to large ideas of justice and citizenship was a real stroke of genius, That, first and foremost. But secondly, that by focusing on art, she was also immediately drawing our attention to something that allows, particularly those who have been marginalized and oppressed, that arena for self-assertion, that proof of a capacity to assert full, irreducible humanity before the world. And as I think about what culture means to me, and as I've wrestled with it as a sociologist and thinking about it, I began to call to mind a phrase from the world of hip-hop. And I thought of the Public Enemy tune, "It takes a nation of millions to hold us back." And you have to think about the nature of our culture and cultural production, about just the floods of images that it takes to create the dehumanized, marginalized images of African Americans. I think that I had in the back of my head, especially through the cameo segment just now, the often unheralded but very important Spike Lee film, Bamboozled, where at the very end of that film, there's just a long sequence of images from minstrel shows, from Sambo cartoons, from comic books and drawings of all kinds depicting African Americans in demeaning, subhuman circumstances. And it just goes on for several minutes. And it was the first time I thought I'd seen an American-made motion picture that captured the overwhelming depth and completely saturating power of a culture of white supremacy and racism. That everyone was suffused in this thing. Everyone had been buried in this thing. And that what I appreciate here are that we also got the sense of the counter-narrative, right? That while we see the uplifting images, like this cover of the Aperture magazine of three generations of proud African-American men and contributors to their own communities and to the world, we know there are other images out there, other images that were routinized, other images that were made a part of day-to-day life, like the Tulsa Massacre postcard, right? That the brutal murder of hundreds of African Americans was an ordinary natural event in accord with the correct state of affairs, so much so that I can send a Dear Mom postcard. I just passed through Tulsa. Isn't this a wonderful place? So that this type of event sharpens, I think, our critical eye and revitalizes our commitment to the struggle for justice. And maybe I'll give just two more remarks as I don't want to get totally caught up in the phrase that Skip Gates evoked in the opening video about the ocean of negative images that are out there, but it's part of what we're struggling against. It's part of why we still have work to do, and it's part of why if I had titled these remarks, they would be, "And we are not yet saved." There's still an enormous amount of work to do here. And one anecdote goes back to my early days as an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, a place that prides itself on being progressive and liberal and forward-looking, the Robert M. La Follette tradition. And I remember sitting at home one day watching the news And there had been coverage for several days of something called the patio burglar. And the patio burglar had been breaking into homes in late spring, early part of summer. And what this burglar would do is look for a sliding glass door that had been left unlocked or an open window, and he'd crawl in and he'd take whatever was readily available. If you had left cash on the counter, an expensive watch, something like that, he'd grab it and run. This had been going on for several weeks, and every few days the patio burglar story came back to life and he'd stolen something. Toward the end of summer, just as school was about to begin, we get a news flash on the 11 o'clock news. The patio burglar's finally been captured. So we're all waiting to see what the coverage is going to be like the next day. Earlier that day, however, that Thursday, a local sheriff had gone out to serve a warrant at a farm in one of the rural parts of Wisconsin, proximate to Madison. And this sheriff, a white man with 3 kids, was shot by the person who he went to serve this warrant on, literally blown in half with 2 shotgun blasts. Really a horrific crime against a law enforcement officer. The person who shot him, I should note here, was also white. So I come home the next day, it's Friday now, I turn on the local evening news, top story, patio burglar finally apprehended. This is the top story. And what's the image that we get? Picture Willie Horton, crazy fro, black male from Chicago, coming into safe, pristine Wisconsin from Chicago. And this is the top story. Now, you might not blame anyone for that imagery in that moment and that ordering of the stories, but story number 2, to my stunned amazement, much a real nod toward Alexandra Bell here, was a human interest piece on how a local boy had gone bad and how could a local boy have killed a sheriff. This was the second piece. And I thought, you have truly got to be kidding me. This guy blew a sheriff in half, and in less than 24 hours, we're worried about how a good local boy could have gone bad, and now you've got this Willie Horton, boogeyman is the top story. That is the cultural environment that we are trying to penetrate. But sometimes these images can be powerful things, and sometimes they can move us to action. And I think it is that sort of note that I want to end on. And I think back to the extraordinary courage and really deep historic perception that animated Emmett Till's mother when she refused to have a closed coffin funeral and said, we're going to do this with an open cask so that the world can see what's been done to my boy. And that image is credited by many, and I think rightly so, with helping to spark a renewed dedication to a fight for racial justice and full inclusion. And so as I think about what lies ahead for us, I want to reiterate that phrase. We are not yet saved, but art, cultural production, the energy and wisdom of the folks in this room who include artists and poets and architects and writers and critics and commentators and historians and literary critics and even the oddball sociologist, when we come together, we can make a difference. We've progressed to a whole new level where Harvard can host an event as remarkable and magical as this one, and I'm delighted to be a part of it. And I want to have you all recall that we're not yet saved and there's work to do. So, tomorrow, we look forward to reconvening and spending the day with another set of brilliant thinkers and practitioners. On behalf of everyone here, I wish to thank the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study for its leadership on this event, the Ford Foundation for its major support, the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research, the Harvard Art Museums and the American Repertory Theater for their contributions, and of course, we would not be here today without the enormous insight, dedication, and sheer genius of Professor Sarah Lewis. So as we say farewell until tomorrow, let's all give it up for Sarah one more time.